Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning, and your parents tell you, no school today. School is closed until further notice. You step outside, and even the road signs look different. Singapore isn't called Singapore anymore. It's now Syonan-to, which means light of the south in Japanese. At the same time, everyone is whispering about a new, feared military police called the Kempeitai. One careless comment or one wrong move might be enough to get you arrested. In this lesson, we're going to walk through what it was really like to live through those years from 1942 to 1945 under Japanese rule. Not as a famous leader, but as a normal student, a villager, an ordinary person trying to survive each day. Let's set the scene properly before we dive into people's experiences. On 15 February 1942, the British surrendered Singapore to the Japanese after a short but intense campaign. Within days, the Japanese renamed the island Syonan-to, or Light of the South, to show that it was now part of the Japanese Empire. From 1942 until 12 September 1945, Singapore remained under Japanese military rule. During this period, British soldiers who used to defend the island were turned into prisoners of war or paudus. The Japanese army, together with the Kempeitai, now controlled daily life in Syonan-to. For ordinary people, this sudden change was shocking and frightening. Before the occupation, many people in Singapore believed that the British were strong and would always protect them. That belief was shattered almost overnight. After the surrender, people saw British troops marching with their hands up, then locked away in prisoner of war camps. At the same time, Japanese soldiers patrolled the streets and set up checkpoints, while the Kempeitai hunted down anyone they suspected. If you were living there, you would see the people you once viewed as protectors become prisoners, and the new rulers enforcing strict control. This is important for exams. When you see questions about why did people lose faith in the British, this moment, the surrender and the new Japanese rule, is one key turning point. For many Chinese families, the Japanese occupation started with terror. In February and March 1942, the Japanese carried out a large operation called Sook Ching, which means purge through cleansing. Chinese males, usually between 18 and 50 years old, were ordered to report to screening centers around Singapore for so-called registration. Japanese officers and informers used these centers to identify people they believed were anti-Japanese elements. On paper, this looked like a normal registration exercise, but in reality, it was the start of mass arrests and executions that would scar the Chinese community for years. So, what happened after the screening? Men who were marked as suspicious or anti-Japanese were separated from the others and taken away in lorries. Many of them were brought to beaches like Changjai, Punggol, and Sentosa, far from the crowded city areas. There, they were executed and their bodies buried in mass graves. Families often never saw their fathers, brothers, or sons again. Imagine being a child in that situation, watching your father leave home because the Japanese ordered him to register, and he simply never returns. When you see the word fear in an exam question about the occupation, Sook Ching is one of the clearest examples you can use. The terror did not end after Sook Ching. Throughout the occupation, the Kempeitai, the Japanese military police, became a symbol of fear and control. They used informers who secretly reported on neighbors and co-workers, so people were afraid to speak openly. Anyone suspected of being anti-Japanese, helping the resistance, or even just spreading rumors could be arrested. Kempeitai methods included brutal interrogation and torture in places like their headquarters at Oxley Rise. Because of this, many people lived in constant fear, never knowing who they could trust. Exam tip: if a source talks about fear, spying, or sudden arrests, link it to both Sook Ching and the Kempeitai's role in controlling the population. Living under occupation was not just about political control, it was also about daily survival. Because of the war and Allied blockades, food imports into Singapore dropped sharply. By the later years of the occupation, especially around 1945, many residents were malnourished. Think of your favorite hawker stall today. During the occupation, many stalls simply disappeared because there was not enough rice, meat, or vegetables to sell. People had to get used to smaller, simpler meals, and sometimes going to bed hungry. So when you see hardship in a question, food shortages are one of the first examples you can bring in. To manage the limited food supply, the Japanese introduced rationing. Families were given ration cards, and they had to show these cards to buy basic items like rice or sugar. People queued for hours, not even sure if there would still be food left when they reached the front. If you were unlucky, the shop might run out just before your turn. Some people turned to the black market, where goods were sold secretly at very high prices. Buying there was risky. If the Japanese authorities found out, both buyers and sellers could be punished. This mix of ration cards, long queues, and black market trading shows how stressful everyday life became. Money itself became a problem. The Japanese issued their own military currency in Singapore, often called banana notes, because of the design printed on them. At first, people used these notes for normal transactions, like any other money. But as the war went on, the Japanese printed more and more of this currency without proper control. This caused inflation. Prices went up, and the notes quickly lost their value. By the end of the war, banana notes were almost worthless, and people's savings could disappear overnight. So hardship was not only about food and work, it was also about not knowing whether your money would still mean anything tomorrow. School life also changed drastically. When the Japanese first took over, many schools were closed for a period as the new rulers tried to reorganize education. After some time, schools reopened, but they now had to follow Japanese policies. Some teachers were removed, especially if they were seen as too pro-British or refused to cooperate. If you were a student, you might suddenly find that your favorite teacher was gone, your textbooks were replaced, and your timetable looked completely different. So, education did not stop completely, but it was heavily controlled and used as a tool by the Japanese authorities. One of the biggest changes in schools was language. Students were expected to learn Japanese, and in many cases, English was discouraged or even banned in the classroom. Imagine your teacher being told, "No more English lessons. From now on, only Japanese." If some teachers refused to follow these instructions, they could be dismissed from their jobs or punished. Students learned Japanese songs, slogans, and sometimes had to bow towards the emperor's portrait every day. This shows how the Japanese tried to shape young people's minds and loyalties through language and school routines. But it wasn't just about language. It was also about propaganda. In lessons, students heard a lot about the Nippon spirit and the idea that Japan was leading Asia in the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Japan was presented as a liberator freeing Asians from Western rule, while negative information about Japan was left out. Physical training and vocational skills were emphasized, sometimes more than academic subjects, to prepare students to serve the Japanese Empire. When you work with sources in exams, if you see a poster or a textbook that praises Japan strongly and only shows one side, always ask, whose purpose does this serve? Often, the answer is that it was meant to win support, encourage obedience, or build pride in the Japanese Empire. So far, we've talked about fear, hardship, and propaganda. But there's one more important idea. Not everyone experienced the occupation in the same way. Your race, your nationality, your gender, and even your job could change how you were treated. Chinese, Malays, Indians, Eurasians, Europeans, women, and children all had different stories. When exam questions ask you about people's experiences during the Japanese occupation, they are usually expecting you to compare at least 2 or 3 groups, not just describe one. So, in this section, we'll quickly walk through how different groups were affected before we bring everything together at the end. For the Chinese community, the occupation was especially harsh. Because Japan was at war with China, the Japanese in Singapore were suspicious of local Chinese, worrying that they might support China or resist Japanese rule. Sook Ching targeted mainly Chinese males, and many families lost loved ones during the screenings and execution. On top of that, Chinese communities also suffered from shortages, forced labor, and constant fear of being reported to the Kempeitai. So, if you need an example of a group that faced terror and targeted violence, the Chinese community is the clearest case. This helps you answer questions about which group suffered the most, or how did different people experience fear. For Malays, the experience was more mixed. Some Malays initially saw the Japanese as fellow Asians who were removing Western colonial rule. A few joined local forces or organizations supported by the Japanese. However, many Malays still suffered from the same food shortages, inflation, and general hardship as everyone else. For Indians, the Japanese tried to win them over by supporting the formation of the Indian National Army, or INA, which aimed to fight the British in India. Indian soldiers and civilians were encouraged to see Japan as a partner in the struggle against British rule. So, for Malays and Indians, there was a mix of hope, cooperation, and suffering, rather than a simple all bad or all good experience. Eurasians and Europeans experienced a major loss of status. Before the war, many of them enjoyed privileges under British rule, but during the occupation, a number were interned in camps and treated as enemies. Women faced their own challenges. Besides food shortages and long queues, some had to deal with the threat of violence or harassment, and many took on extra work to support their families. Children's schooling was disrupted, and many grew up with constant fear, hunger, and uncertainty. When you write about women and children, focus on daily survival, food, safety, and keeping families together, rather than big political events. It might be easy to assume that everyone just obeyed the Japanese, but that isn't the full story. Some people joined resistance groups that tried to gather information, sabotage Japanese plans, or support Allied forces. Others helped more quietly by passing messages, sharing news from secret radios, or helping guerrilla fighters in the jungles. All of this was extremely risky. If the Kempeitai discovered that you were involved in resistance activities, you could be tortured or executed. So when a question asks about responses to Japanese rule, remember to mention not just suffering and adaptation, but also resistance. Of course, not everyone could or wanted to join organized resistance. Most ordinary people focused on survival and adapted in small but important ways. Families started growing vegetables in small plots of land to reduce their dependence on the limited food supply. Bartering became common. People exchanged goods and services directly instead of using unreliable banana notes. Neighbors shared resources and helped each other when times were especially tough. These small acts of adaptation might not sound dramatic, but they were crucial in helping communities get through the occupation. Even in dark times, people tried to keep some sense of normal life. When schools were disrupted, some parents and older siblings organized informal lessons at home so that children wouldn't fall too far behind. Festivals and religious events were sometimes celebrated quietly, with fewer decorations and simpler food, but they still gave people hope and strength. Oral histories from survivors talk about homemade toys, handwritten notes, and small family gatherings that helped them stay positive. So when you think about the occupation, don't just imagine victims and fear. also remember the resilience and creativity that helped people endure. Now, let's look at how all these experiences changed people's views of the British. Before 1942, many people in Singapore believed that the British were powerful and would always defend the island. The quick defeat of the British in 1942, sometimes called the Fall of Singapore, shocked everyone. Seeing British soldiers put down their weapons and become prisoners destroyed the image of British invincibility. For many locals, this was the moment they realized that Western powers were not as strong or reliable as they had thought. In exam answers, this is a key point when you're explaining why trust in British rule declined after the war. The years of hardship under Japanese rule also affected how people viewed the British afterwards. People remembered that British defenses had failed and that the British had not been able to prevent the suffering that followed. When the British returned in 1945, some people were happy to see them again. But the relationship was not the same as before. Many now saw the British as just another colonial power, not as protectors they could totally depend on. This loss of trust made it easier for people to imagine a future where local leaders, instead of the British, would run the country. So, the occupation did not just cause pain during the war, it also changed political attitudes after the war. These changes in attitude helped to spark the growth of nationalism in Singapore. More people started thinking that Singaporeans themselves should have a say in how the country was governed. After 1945, as people faced post-war problems like housing shortages and unemployment, they began to support local leaders who spoke up for their needs. This eventually led to movements pushing for self-government and, later on, independence. So, the Japanese occupation is not an isolated topic. It connects directly to later chapters about post-war politics and nation-building. In your essays, linking these topics together can help you show a stronger understanding of cause and effect. Let's bring this back to the exam. If you get a question like, did the Japanese occupation change the way people viewed Singapore and the British? Don't panic. First, use fear and control, Sook Ching and the Kempeitai to show how extreme the occupation was. Next, use daily hardship, food shortages, rationing, banana notes, unemployment, and different groups' experiences to show how everyone was affected in different ways. Then, link all of that to the loss of trust in British protection and the rise of the idea that Singaporeans should look after themselves. If you can cover these three areas clearly, you will already have a strong answer. Before we end, let's quickly recap the 5 key ideas you should remember. First, from 1942 to 1945, Singapore became Syonan-to under Japanese rule, and daily life changed completely. Second, fear and control was shown through events like Sook Ching and the actions of the Kempeitai. Third, people faced serious hardship, food shortages, rationing, banana notes, and unemployment. Fourth, different groups, Chinese, Malays, Indians, Eurasians, women and children, had varied experiences, from terror to mixed hopes to loss of privilege. Finally, all of this led many people to lose trust in the British and start thinking that Singaporeans should take charge of their own future. To lock this in, here's a quick practice question for you. Pause the video and answer this. Was life during the Japanese occupation the same for everyone in Singapore? Explain using at least 2 different groups. Think about the Chinese and Sook Ching, the Malays and Indians, or women and children, and use specific examples. When you're ready, unpause and compare your ideas with your textbook or class notes. In the next video, we'll continue the story by looking at post-war challenges and how the occupation led into the rise of nationalism and self-government. If this lesson helped you, remember to share it with a friend who's also revising this topic.